How were troops supplied during a Civil War siege? Have you ever wondered how armies managed to keep their soldiers fed and equipped during the long and grueling sieges of the American Civil War? The answer lies in a mix of clever planning and resourceful transportation methods. Supplying troops during a siege was no small task, especially when forces were surrounded or cut off from their main supply lines. At the core of this operation were railroads, wagon trains, and river transport. The Union, with its extensive railroad network and industrial strength, had a significant advantage. They used railroads to transport vast amounts of food, weapons, and equipment right to the front lines. A great example of this was during the Siege of Petersburg, where the Union set up supply depots connected by rail. From these depots, wagons carried supplies directly to the troops in the trenches. When railroads were damaged or unavailable, the Union relied on wagons pulled by horses or mules for overland transport. This method was essential for moving supplies when rail lines could not be used. On the other hand, the Confederacy faced much tougher challenges. With fewer railroads and less navigable waterways, Southern commanders had to depend more on wagon trains and riverboats. Unfortunately, they often experienced shortages of food, clothing, and equipment, especially due to the Union blockade that restricted their ability to import supplies. In a siege, local supply lines could become vulnerable or completely cut off. This situation forced armies to stockpile supplies before the siege began or attempt risky resupply missions through enemy lines. The Union's logistical system allowed for a more consistent supply during long sieges. They maintained rail connections and established forward depots to keep their troops supplied. In contrast, the Confederates struggled to keep their supply levels up as their transportation networks deteriorated. Specialized roles like quartermasters were crucial in managing these logistics. They calculated daily needs, often amounting to millions of pounds of food and forage for tens of thousands of soldiers and animals. Quartermasters coordinated the delivery of these supplies to units spread across wide fronts. They also had to adapt to changing conditions, such as damaged railroads or enemy interference, by shifting to wagon transport or finding alternative routes. In summary, the supply of troops during a Civil War siege relied heavily on a combination of railroads, wagons, and waterways. The Union's superior infrastructure made it easier for them to maintain supply lines effectively. Meanwhile, the Confederacy faced greater logistical difficulties but did their best to sustain their forces with the limited resources they had. The success of siege operations often depended on how well each side managed these supply challenges.